Ball. All right, guys, I'm going to give my instant reaction to the updated AP poll here post week number 9. Of course, this poll will be virtually meaningless in 2 days when the College Football Playoffs Committee comes out with their first initial rankings on Tuesday night. That is basically what everyone will use when it comes to where each team is ranked and things like that. But, it is interesting to look at the AP poll still. And of course, we still do have the top 3 teams remaining the same, but it is interesting. Right now, Tennessee is tied for number 2 with Ohio State, and I would say they probably should be the outright number 2, considering they have 18 first-place votes compared to Ohio State's 15 first-place votes. Georgia still in first place with 30 first-place votes. And we've got Tennessee going to Georgia. I've speculated that's going to be a 1v2 matchup when the committee releases. I think they're going to go Georgia number 1, Tennessee 2, Ohio State 3. The AP poll is going 1 for Georgia, and then Ohio State and Tennessee tied at 2. Tennessee crushed Kentucky, who was a ranked team at home. Ohio State struggled a little bit on the road at Penn State, moving the ball, things like that. So not surprising that they would move Tennessee up into a tie with Ohio State. 4 through 10 is pretty much unchanged. You've got Michigan sitting at 4 after beating Michigan State. I still think there are, some significant questions with Michigan's ability to pass the ball. Clemson at number 5, their resume took a massive hit. I know there had been a few people arguing Clemson should be a top 4 or a top 3 team based off of their resume. Well, several teams that Clemson beat just got crushed, like Wake Forest, Syracuse, and others. They're sitting at number 5. Alabama at number 6, still in front of undefeated TCU. Honestly, I really don't have a big issue with it. I feel like people treat TCU with kid gloves, and it's like they don't hold TCU to the same standard they hold Michigan to, or Ohio State, or Georgia, where TCU just has horrible ball control. Let's be honest, several of these games that TCU has won, they're coming from behind. They're allowing 30, 35 points. Nothing against TCU. They're definitely a top 10 team, but I feel like it's like people are trying to play, TCU is this small school that gets no respect, when in reality, if you look at their advanced numbers, they're just not that impressive. But they are undefeated. They are a top 7 team. I do agree. But I understand people are going to be pissed off that a one-loss team like Alabama is in front of an undefeated Big 12 team. You've got Oregon sitting at number 8. They beat California on the road. USC moves up to number 9. They were able to defeat Arizona without Jordan Addison, but they didn't cover the spread. That's, them moving up is mainly due to the situation with Oklahoma State getting crushed because they were number 9. And then we've got UCLA re-entering the top 10 at number 10. They, of course, crushed Stanford at home in the late night game. Number 11 is Ole Miss. I think it's just because they're 8-1. I mean, Ole Miss does not have one single good win. They're significantly overranked, but they are 8-1. They are an SEC team, so that's what you can pretty much expect. The fact that they're in front of Utah, Utah is 6-2, but Utah, on a neutral field, Utah, with their starting quarterback, would beat Ole Miss 9 times out of 10. Kansas State up to number 13, so they're up 9 spots after their 48-0 trouncing over Oklahoma State. I think that's a little bit of an overreaction. In my opinion, that Kansas State-Oklahoma State game was a little bit more of Oklahoma State's a little bit overrated rather than Kansas State is just, really good. But I understand moving them up to 13. They beat, the previously number 9 team by 48. Illinois up to number 14. Illinois just keeps winning. They keep playing good defense. They did get a little bit lucky. Casey Thompson got injured. Nebraska, I know they only scored 9 points in this game, but it doesn't really tell the full story. They were moving the ball with their starting quarterback. Their starting quarterback gets injured. Illinois right now in sole possession of first place in the Big Ten West. I do believe that Purdue is going to have something to say about that. I don't know if Purdue will actually pass them and be the representative, but it's just tough for me to see Illinois making the Big Ten championship game. LSU up to number 15, so LSU has a home game versus Alabama this week. That's going to get a little bit more juice. They are 6-2. They do have the advanced metrics, so that's why they're up. Penn State falls 3 spots to number 16. I think that's pretty fair. They played well against Ohio State. It kind of, the turnovers got to them in the fourth quarter. They kind of had a Buckeye avalanche there at the end, but Penn State, they're still 6-2. They're still well within reason to make a New Year's Six Bowl. They've got a very easy 4 games left on their schedule, and they're looking at a potential 10-2 season, finishing maybe even inside the top 10 if they do win out. North Carolina at number 17, so they are 7-1. Of course, North Carolina has a really, really bad defense, but again, they are 7-1. They're in a Power 5 conference. At this point in the season, you're going to move up. They're inside the top 20. Oklahoma State falls to 18. Personally, I would move them down further. I mean, you can't lose 48-0. You just can't. Tulane up to number 19. They were on a bye last week. I think it's a little bit high for Tulane, but I don't hate it. Wake Forest is down 10 spots. I would probably have Wake Forest unranked. They're just extremely one-dimensional. Sam Hartman has a massive meltdown. I get they're 6-2, and maybe if I actually looked at all the teams, I would say they should be ranked. But overall, Wake Forest, just a horrible performance on the road at Louisville. They got absolutely trounced. NC State is up 3 spots after almost losing to Virginia Tech. NC State is not a good football team at all. But I guess they won, so they're up 3 spots. Syracuse is down 6 spots. That loss to Notre Dame was rough. Notre Dame just simply outclassed them on the road. So they moved down. Liberty gets ranked. It is funny with Liberty. About 3 weeks ago, they almost lost to an FCS team, Gardner-Webb, and now they're ranked. So it is funny. But, I'm fine with Liberty getting ranked. I think it's cool. Oregon State, I love this. I love that Oregon State got ranked at 6-2. Will they be able to maintain it? I think they face Washington this week. It's going to be a tough game, but it is cool to see them ranked. And then how about UCF? Even with their backup quarterback, they beat Cincinnati. I've been pounding on the table. This team should be ranked, and they finally get a shout out at number 25. You've got Texas, who is unranked. I would probably have Texas ranked in the low 20s. Kentucky, I agree. I would have them unranked. You've got to at least be semi-competitive against Tennessee. That was embarrassing. I know Tennessee is a really good team this year, but still, you can't lose 44-6. Maryland, I would have ranked in the low 20s. I think Maryland's a good football team when they have their starting quarterback. Cincinnati, you've got to unrank them. You lose to UCF. UCF's backup quarterback plays most of the game. Notre Dame gets some votes. I would seriously consider ranking Notre Dame. It's a real shame when you think about what happened in Notre Dame, where all you have to do is beat Stanford at home. If Notre Dame, everyone goes back to the Ohio State loss. They go back to the Marshall loss. Even if you lose those 2 games, Notre Dame has a road win at North Carolina where they won by 13 points. It was an easy victory. They dominated BYU in a neutral site. And then they've got this dominant win over Syracuse, but they have that loss at home to Stanford, so it's just tough to rank them. But metrics like Notre Dame, Washington with 12 votes, they don't play enough defense. Arkansas with 11 votes, they don't play enough defense. I would rank Baylor. I know people may say, they have 3 losses. They're a top 20 team in my opinion. I'm just going to say that. Coastal Carolina, I would keep them unranked. FSU, they crushed Georgia Tech. I would have them unranked. Troy getting a shot at with 7 votes. Mississippi State in there. Boise State after their dominant win. East Carolina, they've gotten some big wins. They just beat BYU. And then we've got South Carolina getting a few votes after their... I don't know why South Carolina was ranked in the first place. I feel like it was just a throw-in because they were an SEC team that was 5-2. But literally no metric thought South Carolina was a top 30 team, let alone a top 25 team. And to make matters worse, the so-called top 25 team were 3.5-point favorites at home against Missouri, who just won by 3 against Vanderbilt, and then Missouri beat South Carolina. I don't know who is still voting for South Carolina. Louisville gets a vote after they're stomping over Wake Forest, and then UTSA gets a vote, so a shout out to them. But the big news here, I think, going into Tuesday, I'll give my official prediction on what I think the committee is going to do. To me, I think the top 5 is very cut and dry. It comes down to the argument of a one-loss Alabama versus an undefeated TCU. I think number 1 will be Georgia. Number 2 will be Tennessee. Number 3 will be Ohio State. Number 4 will be Michigan. Number 5 will be Clemson. And then 6 and 7, it's the debate between the undefeated TCU and Alabama. Alabama has all the better metrics. They've got a better schedule. They've got better game control, but they do have the loss. TCU is undefeated, so it'll be interesting to see what the committee does with that. But I do think we will get the 1v2 matchup of Tennessee at Georgia next week. That game is 3:30 on CBS. And then just looking so far ahead, you've got Michigan very likely to win out all the way until that game in Columbus, and Ohio State basically a lock to win out up until that game in Columbus. We're looking at a potentially 2v3 matchup, Michigan at Ohio State, both of those teams undefeated, and that sets up an interesting dynamic. If Michigan loses a close game by a field goal on the road to an undefeated Ohio State, would they have an argument for the playoffs, and would their horrible non-conference schedule bite them at that point? That will be something interesting to watch. And then you've got this SEC cluster where you've got a nightmare scenario. What if Georgia, Alabama, Tennessee all finish with one loss, with Alabama winning the SEC championship game? It is a total nightmare. Of course, this is something that's different with the SEC because we're so used to the past 3 or 4 years. It's Georgia and Alabama. One of those teams is guaranteed to get in. Both of them might get in. Now we add Tennessee to the mix, and it makes it even more complicated, and it gives the SEC even more options, which I'm sure people are not going to be happy about. And the biggest storyline will be, will they rank one-loss Alabama ahead of undefeated TCU? I'm sure people are going to be very pissed about it. Personally, I would understand why they would do it. I look at the analytics, I look at metrics, things like that. But I also would say, listen, I would rank TCU probably above Alabama. Do I think TCU could beat Alabama on a neutral field? No. But this is a snapshot on this season, and Alabama, let's be real, they should have 2 losses. They should have lost to Texas in week 2. So I would have TCU in front of Alabama at this point. I know the metrics say Alabama's better. I get it. But that's just my opinion. So we will see what the committee does. Of course, these AP poll rankings, they're pretty much meaningless. They do offer good, historical snapshots because when people judge blue bloods, they reference their AP top 25 appearances, their AP top 5 appearances, their AP number 1 appearances. So it does technically matter in that sense. But just for this season, this poll is pretty much meaningless at this point. But it is interesting to kind of analyze it and look at it. And of course, part of the reason this poll is meaningless, you've got voters who are so uninformed. You're voting for South Carolina. South Carolina, I wouldn't even have inside my top 50, let alone top 25. So guys, that is why it is kind of meaningless. But either way, that's going to do it for this video. Make sure you're following me on Twitter. Link to that's always in the description.